Hello, my friend. My name is Tai, and I'm a farmer who raises Cherry Valley meat ducks, the CV2000, also known as the SM3 line. Climb on up into the passenger seat of my dusty pickup and let me tell you a story. It's a tale of feed and feathers of mistakes and miracles, all unfolding on my duck farm. This is a personal journey through 42 days of raising a flock of Cherry Valley ducks from hatchlings to market weight, focusing on their nutrition every step of the way. I'll share the challenges I faced, the lessons I learned, and the moments that nearly broke me, and the moments that made it all worthwhile. It's a story for anyone starting out with ducks, something to keep you company on the long drive, told in the warm voice of someone who's been in your boots. Brooding Beginnings Day to 14. I still remember the day my first batch of Cherry Valley ducklings arrived. Day 1. Early morning, I lift the lid off a chirping box and a wave of warmth and the smell of clean wood shavings hits me. Inside are 1,000 fuzzy yellow ducklings, newly hatched, eyes bright, but bodies tiny, barely 50 grams each. My heart swelled with equal parts joy and anxiety. These little lives were now in my hands. I gently tipped them out into the brooding pen. I'd prepared a circle of corrugated cardboard under the hover brooder lamps. The heat was set to about 35 degrees under the lamps and 27 degrees background, just as the Cherry Valley Handbook recommended for day-old ducklings. Immediately the ducklings scurried under the warm glow, soft peeps turning into contented cheeps. The first 48 hours were critical. I had spread newspapers on the floor and sprinkled feed on them, making a gentle rain of fine crumbles across the paper. The feed was a high-protein starter crumble, around 20 to 22% protein, formulated especially for ducklings. I'd read that a quality starter feed is vital for these fast-growing meat ducks. Some farmers even start with a 23% protein chick starter for 2 weeks before switching down to grower feed. Cherry Valley's own guidelines say for large operations, a starter 1 feed is given from 0 to 9 days, then a starter 2 from day 10 to 16, each one precisely balanced for the ducklings' needs. Being a small farm at the time, I opted for a simpler program, 1 starter feed for the full 2 weeks. My starter feed was a bright, grainy mash of maize soybean meal, a touch of fish meal, and a pre-mix of vitamins and minerals. It smelled fresh and a little sweet, like toasted cornmeal, and the ducklings instinctively began pecking at it. I made sure clean, lukewarm water was right beside them in shallow trays and small drinker fountains, so they could sip and swallow feed easily. Ducks need water to wash down their food. Some were hesitant, but within the first hour, most were busy eating or slurping water. That first day, I hardly moved from the brooder pen. I was kneeling on the litter, showing a few slow learners how to drink by dipping their bills gently in the water. I could feel the heat on my face and smell that mix of new straw chick feed and brooder heat, a scent that would later become deeply comforting to me. I whispered encouragement to those tiny birds, urging them to eat and drink within the first 6 hours, because I knew every moment counted. In fact, I had learned that every extra gram a duckling gains by 7 days of age can add as much as 8 to 10 extra grams to its final weight at slaughter. Early nutrition is like laying a foundation. If you do it right, the building, or in this case, the duck, will stand tall and strong. But despite my preparation, I made mistakes in those early days. Being new and trying to save money, I initially used a generic chick starter feed that was formulated for chickens. Protein is protein, feed is feed. It should be fine, I thought. The ducklings grew all right for the first week, but I started noticing some of them weren't walking normally. A few ducklings developed a peculiar wobble. They would take a few steps and then squat down as if their little legs were too weak. One morning I found a couple with legs splayed out, unable to stand. My stomach dropped. I feared an outbreak or genetic issue. I called an experienced farmer friend, and after a few questions he asked, "What are you feeding them? And are you adding any brewer's yeast or niacin supplement?" I was puzzled. I hadn't added anything extra. That's when I learned one of my first big lessons in duck nutrition. Ducklings need much more niacin vitamin B3 than chicks do. Chick starter alone often doesn't have enough. Ducks can't synthesize niacin from tryptophan efficiently, so they require nearly twice the niacin that chickens do. A deficiency leads to weak legs, joint issues, and the exact symptoms I was seeing. I felt awful. It was my fault those babies were hurting. That afternoon I raced to town, bought packets of brewer's yeast and a proper waterfowl vitamin mix. I remember the relief in the pit of my stomach as I mixed the yeast into their feed and added vitamins to the water. Within days the ducklings recovered. The ones with mild symptoms bounced back to zipping around the brooder, and none of the others developed serious issues. I never forgot that lesson. Now I always ensure my starter feed or supplements provide at least 70 milligallons of niacin per kilograms of feed for ducklings. It's a small addition that prevents a world of heartache. As I sprinkled the brewer's yeast that first time, the nutty smell of it mixed with the feed, and I whispered an apology to the ducklings. "Eat up, little ones," I said, watching them nibble. "This will make you strong." My early mistake had nearly cost these ducks their mobility, but it taught me to respect the specific nutritional needs of Cherry Valley ducks. No more assuming. I would always double-check my feed formulations from now on. Besides niacin, I learned to pay attention to other vitamins and minerals too. I recall day 2. The tiny ducklings were more active, tumbling over each other to get to feed trays, worried about any dehydration or stress from their long hatchery trip. I mixed up a bowl of water with a soluble vitamin electrolyte powder, bright orange in color, and filled the chick fountains. The ducks drank eagerly, and I knew that boost would help them get started on the right foot. The Cherry Valley guidelines also suggest providing water with a vitamin-mineral preparation for the first 2 days to help the flock get off to a good start. Seeing those little bills dabble in the supplemented water, I felt a small surge of hope. I was doing something right. By the end of the first week, my ducklings had roughly tripled their weight. I remember weighing a sample at 7 days around 350 grams average, up from 50 grams at hatch. They were growing well. Walking into the brooder house every morning, I'd be greeted by a chorus of peeping and the smell of warm feed. I kept the litter clean and dry, adding fresh rice hulls under the heaters each day. Still, moisture was a constant battle. Ducks love water, and even with my small drinkers, they splashed a lot. I noticed the area around the water fonts was getting soggy and starting to smell a bit sour. I knew if I didn't manage this, it could lead to infections or slippery conditions. So I improvised. I placed the waterers on wire mesh stands above a shallow tray, creating a kind of mini drinker island to catch spills. It helped a lot. The litter stayed drier, and the house smelled more of clean straw instead of stagnant water. Later, I would expand on this idea after reading the Cherry Valley Handbook, which recommends using elevated slatted drinker islands after brooding to keep litter dry. Ducks are notorious for turning their drink area into a swamp if you let them. Every evening that first fortnight, I'd do a round with a checklist: feeders, topped up water, fresh, and plentiful temperature just right, gradually reducing by 3 degrees each week. and the ducklings spread evenly, not huddled from cold or panting from heat. The routine was exhausting but rewarding. I hardly left the farm. I'd fall asleep and dream of ducklings only to wake up and rush to check on them at 2 a.m. using my flashlight to ensure they were all okay. My family thought I was overdoing it, but deep down I knew these early days set the trajectory for the flock's success. And indeed, the extra care paid off. Mortality in brooding was low, just a few losses out of that 1,000, and by day 14 most ducklings had feathered out enough on their breasts and shoulders to handle moving to the grow-out house. Moving day 15 was an adventure in itself. Imagine me, a novice farmer at the time, trying to herd a sea of 2-week-old ducks from the brooder barn to the bigger grow-out barn in an orderly fashion. Let's just say there was a lot of squawking and flapping, mostly from the ducks, maybe a little from me, but we managed. As I opened the door to the new barn section, the flock flowed in like a little yellow river, chattering away. I had their new home pre-warmed and bedded with fresh straw feeders and drinkers ready. They looked tiny in the big space, but they quickly found the feed and water as I guided a few to the right spots. Before I knew it, the brooding chapter was over and we were on to the next phase. Growing pains and gains, day 15 to 35. At 2 weeks old, my Cherry Valley ducks had entered the grower stage, the adolescent phase of their 42-day journey. In this period, the focus of their nutrition shifted slightly, from the ultra-high protein starter diet to a bit lower protein but higher energy feed to sustain their rapid growth without wasting nutrients. I reformulated their feed to a grower diet, 18% protein, higher calories, as commonly recommended for meat ducks after 2 weeks. Large-scale Cherry Valley operations often use a starter 2 feed up to day 16, then a dedicated grower feed from day 17 to 42. In my case, I transitioned gradually over a few days, mixing the remaining starter crumbles with the new grower pellets so their digestive systems could adjust. I remember watching them tackle the new feed. The pellets were a bit larger and harder than the baby crumbles. At first, a few ducks picked them up and shook their heads confused, but soon they learned to swallow them down with a gulp of water. Ducks are clever with feed. As waterfowl, they love to nibble, then scoot over to the drinker to wash it down. My barn echoed with a constant rhythm of nibble, splash, gulp, nibble, splash, gulp. The floor around the trough feeders became a mess of wet mash from all that dunking, and I had to clean it frequently. Eventually, I raised the height of the feeders a little to discourage them from making soup out of their feed. This small adjustment cut down on waste significantly, and the ducks didn't mind. They could still reach feed comfortably, but couldn't as easily fling it out while mixing with water. Nutrition was now all about accelerating growth while avoiding issues. The ducks' appetite skyrocketed in this stage. From eating maybe 50-70 grams of feed per bird per day in the first week, they ramped up to over 150 grams day by week. I was astonished at how much feed a flock of 1,000 growing ducks could devour, and also a bit alarmed because feed was the biggest expense of this farm. I recall calculating feed usage and costs in my notebook each evening, the pencil smudged with feed dust. Feed typically accounts for about 60-70% of the total cost of raising meat ducks, so every bit of feed wasted was money lost. I became almost obsessive about feed efficiency. The old-timers call it feed conversion ratio, or FCR. FCR is simply the kilograms of feed needed for 1 kilo of weight gain. Lower is better. It means the ducks convert feed to meat more efficiently. My initial results weren't stellar. Around day 21, I weighed a sample of ducks. They averaged about 1.5 kilograms. They had eaten roughly 3 kilojoules of feed each by that point. Doing the math, the FCR was roughly 2.0 3 kilogram feed per 1.5 kilos gain. Honestly, for a newbie, that was actually pretty decent, but I didn't know that yet. I was aiming for the breed's performance targets, chasing numbers I had read in brochures. Cherry Valley's documentation said their SM3 medium ducks could reach 3.2 keys by 41 days, with an FCR of about 1.198. That's feed efficiency under 2:1, which is top-notch in duck farming. I was determined, maybe too determined to hit those numbers. This pressure I put on myself led to a second big mistake in my journey. In my eagerness to improve growth, I decided around week 4 to tweak the feed. The ducks were about 2.2 kilos each at 28 days on track, but I wanted them even heavier, so I thought, let me boost the energy content, maybe add more corn and a bit of oil, and increase protein a little too. Without consulting a nutritionist, I modified the feed mix, adding extra corn, some rendered oil, and upped the fish meal for protein. I figured more energy plus more protein equals faster growth. I was wrong, and I learned a hard lesson. Over the next week, the birds did gain weight a bit faster, but I started noticing issues. The litter became wetter and slick with oily droppings, and a few ducks developed pasty, messy vents, a sign of digestive upset. One morning, I walked in to find several ducks with wet, matted feathers on their backs and an unpleasant smell. They had obviously sat in oily feces. This was a mess of my own making. The richer diet was more than they needed. They couldn't metabolize it all, and the excess came out as waste that just fouled the environment. The barn's ammonia level rose too. My nose stung slightly, and I knew the ducks' lungs would be feeling it. Some ducks started to cough and sneeze from the irritation. I realized I had pushed them too hard nutritionally instead of letting them grow at a steady, healthy pace. Panicked, I immediately reversed course. I cut the added fat and diluted the feed with a bit of wheat to bring protein back in balance. I also increased ventilation in the house to dry out the litter and flush out ammonia. For a couple of days, I was on my knees with a rake and shovel, removing the worst of the wet bedding and replacing it with fresh straw and rice hulls. Those were long days. I'd underestimated how heavy and sticky wet duck litter can be. As I heaved shovel loads into a wheelbarrow, my boots slurping in the muck, I promised myself I wouldn't get greedy like that again. Growth is good, I muttered, but balanced growth is better. The ducks quickly recovered once their feed was normalized, and their barn was freshened up. In fact, they seemed happier with the plainer diet. They ate eagerly but not excessively, and their droppings firmed up, becoming easier to manage. From this episode, I learned to respect the science of feed formulation. More isn't always better. Ducks have optimal nutrient needs. Around 2,900 3,000 kcals of energy per kg of feed and 18 to 20% protein in the grower phase is typically adequate for Cherry Valley ducks. If you go too high on energy or protein, you're just wasting feed and potentially causing health issues. In my case, the excess nutrients literally went down the drain or onto the floor. I also learned the importance of good ventilation and litter management. A wet environment can dramatically affect growth and feed conversion. Ducks may love water, but even they don't thrive in a constantly damp, ammonia-filled house. After that scare, I installed a few low-cost fixes. I added extra drinker pans with grates and even a slight slope on the barn floor toward a drain channel to carry away wastewater. These changes kept our litter much drier. The ducks stayed clean and comfortable, and my own eyes and throat thanked me for the clearer air. By day 35, my flock was in its home stretch of the growing period. The adolescent ducks were now hefty creatures with pure white feathers except where some straw stains might have painted their bellies. When I opened the barn door at dawn, I'd be greeted by a wave of quacking and the thunder of webbed feet as hundreds of ducks hustled toward me, partly out of curiosity and partly because they associated me with full feed hoppers. It's a bit intimidating, honestly, to be rushed by that many ducks, but it also made me laugh every single time. They had personalities. Some would craning their necks and peering up at me as if to say, "Good morning," others nibbling at my bootlaces. Nutrition-wise, things were now steady and optimized. I had found a good rhythm, automatic feeders augured in fresh pellets several times a day, and I fine-tuned the feed flow so that troughs were never empty for long. Ducks don't need scheduled mealtimes like some animals. Ad libitum feeding, always available feed, works best for fast growth as long as you manage it to prevent waste. I ensured each duck had enough feeder space so even the smaller ones got their share. Anytime I spotted a duckling that looked underweight or struggled to compete, I gently moved it to a less crowded pen with extra feed and a bit more TLC. Culling or separating the runts improved the uniformity of the flock. By 5 weeks, I was proud to see that the ducks were fairly uniform in size, a sign of good nutrition and good uniform access to feed and water. During this period, I also started paying attention to the feed conversion ratio in a more positive way. I wasn't chasing unrealistic numbers anymore. I was tracking it to ensure we stayed efficient. I kept weekly records: feed delivered versus weight gained. Initially, our FCR had wobbled around 2.2 due to my overfeeding mishap, but once corrected, I saw it improve. Experience shows that good feed quality and proper management can improve feed conversion, and I found that to be true. One big factor was feed form and quality. I had switched from mash feed in the early days to pelleted feed as soon as the ducks could handle it because pellets dramatically reduce waste. Cherry Valley advises always using pelleted feeds. Mash can lead to high wastage and poorer FCR. I saw the difference firsthand. The ducks ate the pellets clean up, whereas the mash used to end up scattered and trampled. Better feed form yields better conversion. By day 35, our FCR was tracking close to 2.0, which made me very happy. This meant for about 1 kg of weight gain, they ate 2 kg of feed, not far from the textbook target of 1.98. Another aspect I fine-tuned was water management. I've mentioned it throughout, but it's worth emphasizing water is as important as feed for ducks. Poor water can ruin good feeding. I learned to always provide plenty of clean water. In fact, I installed water meters and found that my ducks would use between 2 to 3 liters of water per duck per day in our warm climate by week 5, and even more on hotter days. Ducks are messy drinkers, and not all that water is consumed. A lot ends up on the floor. Still, you must never restrict them. I ensured the water flow rate in our nipple drinkers was high enough so every duck could drink its fill, even at peak thirst times. If water was even briefly insufficient, I'd see an immediate impact. The ducks would eat less because they need water to swallow and digest, and they'd become restless. A couple of times, a clogged pipe or a briefly malfunctioning pump taught me how vital water is. The ducks let me know quickly. After those incidents, I set up redundant systems. 2 lines of drinkers on separate valves, and checked them twice daily without fail. We also did weekly line flushes with a mild sanitizer to prevent any algae or biofilm buildup in the pipes. I'd crawl under the water lines, scrubbing away with a brush, coming out soaked, but satisfied that the water was fresh. The effort was worth it. My flock stayed healthy, and their feed intake stayed high, which translated to steady gains. So there I was, with the finish line in sight. The ducks were robust and nearing market size. My feed regimen was dialed in, and no major health issues had cropped up. But farming loves to throw curveballs, and I faced one more challenge as we approached the final week. Finishing strong day 3642. In a perfect story, I'd tell you the last week was smooth sailing. In reality, it tested my nerves in a different way. Day 38 arrived, and the integrator, the company that buys my ducks, notified me that they'd like to pick the ducks up a day earlier than scheduled, on day 41 instead of day 42, due to a processing plant adjustment. This meant I had one less day to hit the target weight. 3.2 kg live weight was the goal for Cherry Valley ducks around 6 weeks, and my last sampling had them at about 2.9 to 3.0 kgs on day 38. I calculated frantically they were gaining on average 60 to 70 grams per day at this stage. Losing a full day of growth might mean falling short by 1/10 or 2 of a kilogram. It might not sound like much, but for 1,000 ducks, every 0.1 kilo short is 100 kilo less meat and a smaller paycheck. I felt a knot in my stomach. I debated what to do. You can't exactly force ducks to grow faster overnight. I considered keeping lights on 24 hours to encourage more feeding. They were on an 18-hour light schedule, giving them a few hours of dark to rest per best practices. But I worried that might stress them or cause more leg fatigue. Finally, I decided on a middle path. I gave them a fresh rotation of feed slightly later into the night than usual, and started the morning feed very early, effectively squeezing in a bit more eating time without totally removing the dark period. I also made sure the feed was top quality for finishers. I screened out any fines powder and only fed intact pellets and crumbles so they wouldn't waste time filtering feed. Some large operations use a separate finisher feed, lower protein, high energy after day 42. But since mine were being harvested at 41 days, I simply continued the grower feed, which was sufficient. During those final days, I walked the barns with a keen eye. The ducks were so big now. Beautiful wide chests, strong legs, a sea of white feathers with that occasional cheeky one looking for a gap in the fence. Cherry Valley ducks are hardy and curious, I learned. I listened to their contented grunts as they jostled at feeders, and I felt proud. I had raised them well, and they in turn looked healthy and vibrant. I also double-checked that none were overweight to the point of leg issues. Something to watch because too rapid gains or too much fat can strain their legs. Thankfully, their gait was strong and even. The night before pickup, I did one thing that goes slightly against a farmer's grain. I removed the feed. It's standard practice to withdraw feed about 6 to 8 hours before market collection to ensure the ducks' crops empty and they travel better and process cleaner. So at noon on day 40, I let the feeders run empty. The ducks cocked their heads and nibbled at the last crumbs, seemingly perplexed, but soon they settled down on the clean straw to rest. I kept water available, of course, right up until catching time. That evening, I knelt down in the barn, eye level with the birds, and just observed. It was bittersweet. These ducks had been my charges for nearly 6 weeks, and come morning they'd be off to the processor. I always feel a mix of gratitude and sadness at this moment. Gratitude that I've done my job to give them a good life and optimum nutrition, and sadness because I do care about them as living creatures. It's the farmer's paradox: you give your heart to them knowing their destiny. As I sat there, one of the drakes, I could tell by his larger size and raspy quack, pecked gently at my sleeve. Perhaps he was looking for treats, or maybe saying goodbye in his own ducky way. I gently stroked his back, feeling the strong musculature under the feathers. That was the result of all those proteins and balanced amino acids doing their work. I remember the barn lights casting a warm glow, the air cool and fresh. We had the side curtains open to let the night breeze in. The smell of the barn was pleasant now, mostly dry straw, and the slight cereal scent of feed with just an undertone of poultry musk. It's a smell that to me signifies the end of a successful flock. Day 41 before dawn. We started catching at 4 a.m. to avoid the heat stress of the day. My team and I guided the ducks gently into catch pens. I ensured we followed proper handling. We herd them calmly and, when needed, pick them up by the neck gently, a method that, when done right, keeps them calm and avoids injury. An old trick is to hold 2 ducks in one hand by the neck, which looks odd, but prevents them from flapping and hurting themselves. By sunrise, the ducks were on the trucks, and I had a moment to breathe. The barn was suddenly quiet and empty, the litter ruffled where thousands of feet had passed just hours before. Later that afternoon, I got the call our flock had an average live weight of 3.2 kilos. With excellent uniformity and an FCR right about 2.0 overall. I think I whooped out loud in the farm office, causing my collie dog to tilt his head at me in confusion. We did it. We hit the targets. In fact, the processor reported a high yield and complimented the flock's finish. I leaned back in my creaky chair, closed my eyes, and let out a long, deep sigh of relief and satisfaction. In that moment, all the early mornings, the worries, the feed calculations, the sweaty afternoons wrestling with feed bags and water hoses, it all felt worth it. I could practically feel the return of strength to my shoulders as the weight of anxiety lifted. I wished I could tell my younger self, the one who made those early mistakes, hang in there. You'll learn, and it will come together. That evening, I walked through the empty barn as the sun was setting, golden light streaming through the open doors. There were a few stray feathers on the ground, shimmering white against the litter. I picked one up, soft and new, dropped from one of the ducks that morning, and twirled it between my fingers. It felt like a symbol of both fragility and resilience. These birds had come in as tiny, helpless fluff balls, and over 42 days, well, 41 technically, they transformed into robust, market-ready ducks. And I had transformed too, in a way. From a nervous beginner who nearly fumbled the basics, I'd grown into a more confident, knowledgeable farmer. Reflections and lessons learned. Driving my pickup home that night, I passed the old cassava field that I had converted into duck housing. The headlights swept over the sign I'd hung by the gate, Cherry Valley Farm. Quality ducks, quality care. I couldn't help but grin. The journey was far from perfect, but in farming, perfection isn't the goal. Continuous improvement is. As I share this story with you, I hope you can take some of my hard-earned lessons to heart. Here are a few key takeaways from my experience to remember. I like to call them my nutrition golden rules for Cherry Valley ducks. Start strong. In the brooding phase, focus intensely on the first 7 days. Ensure ducklings find feed and water within hours of arrival. Use a high-protein starter around 20–22% protein with proper vitamins, especially adequate niacin for ducklings. The extra effort and nutrients early on will pay off hugely by finish. Every gram gained early multiplies by slaughter time. Clean water, all the way. Never underestimate water. Provide ample clean drinking water at all times, and manage it to keep litter dry. Ducks may use 1.5 to 5 liters of water per bird per day, depending on climate. Much of that ends up spilled, so use drinker systems that minimize splashing nipples. Drinker cups catch pans. Check and clean water lines and drinkers daily. Poor water or wet conditions will ruin feed efficiency and flock health. Phased feeding match feed to each growth phase. Cherry Valley ducks thrive on a phased diet, e.g., starter feed 0-2 weeks, then grower feed to 6 weeks, and a finisher if growing beyond 6 weeks. Changing feed as they age ensures they get the right protein energy levels without waste. In my story, once I switched to the proper grower diet at 2 weeks, I saw better growth and less waste. Feed quality and form. Feed cost is 60 to 70% of your production cost, so treat feed like gold. Use high-quality ingredients, fresh, no mold, and prefer pelleted feed for meat ducks. Pellets or crumbles drastically improve intake and reduce waste compared to mash. Maintain feeders. No moldy or stale feed buildup. Good feed in equals good growth out. Monitor feed. Conversion. Keep an eye on your FCR feed conversion ratio. It tells you a lot about efficiency. If FCR starts creeping up, worsening, investigate, are birds wasting feed? Is the diet unbalanced? Any health or water issues? In my case, fixing diet balance and management brought FCR back to 2.0, which is excellent for heavy ducks. Better, FCR means more weight for the same feed, directly improving profitability. Don't cut corners on nutrients. It's tempting to save money on feed by using cheaper ingredients or lower specs, but underfeeding essentials, protein, vitamins, minerals, will cost you more in slow growth, health problems, and poor finish. I learned to never skimp on the premix. Vitamins and minerals may be a small part of feed, often 5% of feed cost, but they have an enormous impact on duck development. Likewise, hitting the right protein-energy ratio is crucial. Too low protein stunts growth. Too high wastes money and can cause metabolic issues. Balance is key. Adjust, but gently. When making any change, whether feed formula, feeding schedule, or moving the ducks, do it gradually. Ducks are creatures of habit and thrive on routine. Sudden changes can stress them and set back feed intake. I learned to introduce new feed ingredients over several days and to change lighting or temperature slowly. If you need to push for growth like I tried, do it within reason and monitor the ducks closely for any signs of distress. Keep records. I cannot stress enough how keeping a simple log saved me. Write down weekly weights, feed consumption, any diet changes, and health observations. Those notes helped me pinpoint that my niacin was low and that my feed tweak caused issues. They also let me track improvement over flocks. In Cherry Valley's advice, record keeping is vital for problem solving. And it's true. You can't manage what you don't measure. Embrace help and knowledge. Finally, don't go it alone in ignorance. I gained so much from consulting the Cherry Valley technical guides and nutritional literature, as well as leaning on fellow farmers and vets for advice. Modern duck farming is a science as much as an art. For instance, understanding that Cherry Valley SM3 ducks are genetically bred for fast growth and high meat yield helped me appreciate why their nutritional needs are so high and management so crucial. There are great resources, NRC recommendations, FAO guides, academic research. Use them. I often joke that my second farm is my bookshelf, or rather a folder on my computer, full of articles on duck nutrition and management. As I wrap up my story, imagine me back in that pickup truck, driving along a dirt road by my farm at sunset, sharing these memories with you. The day's work is done, at least until the next flock arrives and the cycle begins anew. Cherry Valley ducks taught me about resilience and reward. There were days I felt like giving up, like when I saw those niacin-deficient ducklings struggling, or when I waded through knee-deep wet litter due to my own mistake. But each challenge came with a lesson that made me a better farmer. And the triumphs, oh, the triumphs, like hitting that target weight and hearing the contented quacks of a healthy flock, those moments are pure joy. For you, the beginner farmer, listening to my tale, I want to offer encouragement. You will have your own struggles and successes. When you're driving early to the feed mill or staying up late to check on baby ducks, and you feel that weight of responsibility, remember that every farmer starts as a novice. Learn from mistakes, mine and yours. Celebrate small wins, the first duckling that drinks on its own, the first time you hit your target FCR, and never lose the heart that led you into farming. This job is as emotional as it is technical. It will test your patience, break your heart at times, but it will also fill you with pride and purpose. As I finish this story, the sky ahead is turning orange and purple. The road is bumpy, but I know it by heart now. Just like raising ducks, the journey might be bumpy, but with knowledge and care, you'll know how to navigate it. Thank you for riding along with me and listening to my narrative. I hope it felt like we were two farmers chatting, sharing a heartfelt slice of farm life. Now it's your turn to write your own farming story, and I have no doubt with good nutrition and good practice, you'll find success with your Cherry Valley ducks, just as I did. Safe travels and happy farming.